Welcome, my name is Fabian, and in the following video I'm going to talk about how you build recoverability requirements into the logical design. First of all, we need to talk a little bit about the recoverability concepts. And normally when we talk about recoverability, so what we mean with that is how do you recover from a certain disaster scenario, from any kind of data loss, planned, unwanted data loss. What different options do we have from a logical perspective? And when we talk about this recovery mode, we typically differentiate between an active-passive recovery mode and an active-active recovery mode. So the active-passive recovery mode requires that the passive instance of the service will be promoted after a certain scenario has occurred. So if we have two Horizon pods, we only have active desktops in one pod and only standby desktops in the second pod. That would be an active-passive recovery model. In the active-active recovery mode, we have active running components on both sides of our protected environment. So in the cloud pod architecture, we have running virtual machines in London, we have running virtual machines in New York, and still we have enough resources available so that there might be a failover from New York to London or other way around in the case of a certain scenario. And a very important other thing that we need to clarify up front is what kind of metrics do we need to fulfill, what kind of metrics do we need to design our solution for. And that's where we typically use the recovery time objective, which means how long does it take for us after a certain data loss to recover the whole component back to a consistent state. And the recovery point objective, which means how much data loss, how many hours of data loss can we tolerate in our solution. Those are very important metrics that we need to define with the business. Those are metrics that we have defined with the business in the first phase during the conceptual design. So let's have a look at the example. For example, during the conceptual design, we have defined a requirement that all management components of our Horizon environment must be recoverable with an RPO of 24 hours and in case of a failure with an RTO of 4 hours. So if we have a data loss within 4 hours, we must be able to bring the whole management block, the whole management components back into a state that we can make them operational. So what's the logical design decision? For sure, we can utilize the vSphere API for data protection to protect our virtual machines that make up the management block components. Yeah? So we can utilize the vSphere API for data protection, can use any kind of third-party tool that uses this backup API. But for sure, we need to take into consideration that certain applications might require a dedicated backup and recovery mechanism. So for example, for the connection server, we have the ADLDS database in place, which is kind of a Microsoft domain controller persistent data layer. And that's something where we need to make sure that we cannot just recover our virtual machine from a backup and hope that it works, because they might be out of sync for that. So we need to create other recovery procedures for them. So we need to define for the connection server, we not just utilize a vSphere API for data protection solution, but we also need to utilize a consistent backup and recovery mechanism for that. Another example would be if we talk about user profiles. The user has a profile and he should be able to recover on his own if a certain scenario occurs. If the user deletes his favorites in the Internet Explorer, he should be able to recover those things on his own. That's a requirement we have identified, and therefore we can utilize the VMware Use Environment Manager and the self-support solution that is baked into the component to offer this option to the end user. When we talk about backing up View Composer and the connection server ADLDS, we need to know that every 24 hours, a script backs up the composer settings, so the information about our link clones, and the ADLDS database. So that's a job that runs every night and keeps the last 10 backups in our environment. We can modify the frequency of the backup procedure, and what we can also do is we can change the location of the path where it should be stored, where the backup should be stored. And for sure, we can use built-in mechanism of Horizon to recover afterwards from such a scenario. So what we can do is we recover the connection server VM in general from a backup, and then we use the built-in recovery mechanism to make a consistent recovery of our ADLDS components and the View Composer database. Important, all of those things must be synchronized. We have some dependencies from each other, but since we are in the logical design phase, we do not need to take care about the concrete procedure steps. That's something we typically do during the physical design or when we create later on some kind of operational procedures for our solution. If we want to give the end user the option to recover certain profile characteristics, for example, he has an Internet Explorer profile that is handled via VMware UEM, we can configure a backup within UEM, and we can install the self-support tool to the end user's desktop. So he can now just start the self-support tool, he select the application he wants to recover an older state, he select the date, and he clicks OK, and the application data of the certain user is recovered to the certain point in time. That's a very common use case for self-service recoverability options within Horizon.